That late afternoon in Saudi Arabia, no one understood what had just happened. A tourist from the United States raised his phone, laughed at the worshippers circling the Kaaba, and let out a phrase filled with contempt. The sound echoed through the silent crowd, breaking the reverence of the place. Seconds later, something impossible occurred. A gust took shape over the courtyard. It wasn't a normal breeze. It was a perfect circle, fast, spinning around the pilgrims, knocking down banners, lifting fine dust and provoking cries of astonishment. In the center of the chaos, the foreigner lost his balance and fell to his knees, the phone slipping from his hand. Those nearby swore they felt the air shift, colder, heavier, as if the space itself were responding to the arrogance it had just witnessed. The question lingered in the air. What triggered such a precise sign, and what came after left everyone unsettled? Before continuing, check if you're already subscribed and say in the comments which city you're watching from. The sun was scorching when the elderly man from the Egyptian countryside began another circuit around the Kaaba. He walked slowly, following his own rhythm, as if speaking to the Creator with each step. His breathing was short, but steady. His time-worn hands held the white cloth draped over his shoulder. Two brothers doing tawaf beside him exchanged a worried look. "Uncle, do you need water?" one of them asked, offering a bottle. "May Allah bless you, son. I'm fine. I just need to keep going," the old man replied with a faint smile. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but full of resolve. Each phrase sounded like a hidden prayer. He moved closer to the edge of the crowd, where the shade was scarce but enough to help him catch his breath for a few moments. A Turkish woman noticed how slowly he was walking and commented to her husband, "Look how he keeps trying. Such purity." "There are hearts that speak louder than the body," her husband replied, lowering his head. The elder heard only part of the comment and thanked them with a modest gesture. Without interrupting the supplications, he whispered in ancient Arabic, short, steady words, like the notes of an intimate hymn. "My lords, accept my steps, even the unsteady ones," he murmured as he adjusted the cloth on his face. With each round, the heat seemed to intensify. Sweat ran in streams down his lined face. Even so, his eyes shone with gratitude, a glow that many noticed and respected. Some pilgrims adjusted their pace so he wouldn't be left behind. Others made space when they saw him attempting to move through larger groups. It was in this slow rhythm that an odd sound cut through the air. A short, sharp laugh, completely out of place in such a reverent setting. The old man lifted his head, confused. "What was that?" a young man beside him asked. "I don't know, but it doesn't belong here," the elder replied, frowning. When he looked toward the noise, he saw only a foreign man holding his phone and pointing it at the circling worshippers. The visitor's smile carried an energy that did not belong in that place. The elder paused for a moment. Something inside him sensed that this disrespectful gesture would be the beginning of something greater, something no one expected. The laugh that had torn through the sacred courtyard seemed to follow the elder as he resumed his steps. The crowd continued flowing around the Kaaba, but something in the atmosphere had changed. A faint discomfort, like the feeling that precedes a storm before anyone sees it. Across the circle, the American tourist walked with long strides. He wore a light shirt, dark sunglasses, and held his phone as if witnessing some kind of show. Every few seconds, he brought the device close to his face and recorded sarcastic comments. "Look at this, walking in circles. Unbelievable," he muttered in English, laughing to himself. Some pilgrims understood his words and exchanged uneasy glances. A mother walking with her child, who wasn't even 8 years old, pulled the little one closer, trying to shield him from the atmosphere of disrespect. A young Saudi watched with a serious expression. "Brother, maybe he doesn't understand what he's doing," the young man said. Another replied quietly, "He understands. Look how he points the phone at people's faces." Meanwhile, the Egyptian elder completed another curve. Tired, he sought a patch of shade, but his path crossed directly with the direction the foreign visitor was heading. When the laugh echoed again, loud, careless, out of place, the old man lost his breathing rhythm. His steps faltered, and he placed a hand over his chest. "Uncle, are you okay?" the young Saudi asked quickly. "I am, but something isn't right," the elder said, looking toward the sound. The American, still recording, pointed the camera at the group walking peacefully. "This is going to blow up on my channel. I've never seen people so serious doing something so strange," he commented, laughing as if he were at a show. His words drew more attention. A murmur spread. The tone wasn't anger, but disbelief and a quiet sadness at seeing such irreverence so close to the holiest place on earth. The elder took a few more steps, trying to regain his focus, but the visitor's behavior had already disturbed his concentration. He pressed a hand to his forehead and took a deep breath. "My lord, I keep my intention pure," he whispered. But before he could finish the supplication, the tourist came even closer, practically invading the space around the old man. He pointed the phone at him as if documenting something odd. "Hey, sir, do you do this every day? Can you explain the logic?" he said, his tone dripping with mockery. Some pilgrims were stunned. An older man sitting near the walkway partially lifted himself and warned, "Respect. This is not a place for jokes." The foreigner raised his eyebrows, amused by the warning. "Relax, I'm just filming," he said, rotating the phone in a provocative manner. The elder stepped back. The direct contact with the visitor's mocking gaze brought a strange sensation, almost physical, as if something invisible pushed the air between them. The light over the courtyard seemed to shift. A thin cloud covered the sun for a few seconds, casting an unexpected contrast. A nearby flag fluttered despite the absence of wind. A group of men farther away stopped, sensing the change. "Did you feel that?" one asked. "It's like the air held its breath," another replied. The elder pressed the cloth against his chest and looked toward the Kaaba. The tension was rising. The visitor kept filming, smiling, unaware of what was slowly forming around him. And it was at that moment, when disrespect met the wounded patience of a sacred place, that something began to stir in the atmosphere, preparing the way for what would come next. The elder had just regained his careful rhythm when the tourist stepped into the circulation lane, positioning himself directly in front of him. The movement of the crowd required fluidity, but the foreigner stood still, as if trying to force an interaction. The old man attempted to move around to the left, but the American took a step in the same direction, blocking the way again. "Hey, hold on, sir. Look at me for a second," the visitor said, lifting his phone as if filming were an unquestionable right. The elder tilted his head, confused. "Son, I need to continue. This is my moment with Allah," he replied gently. The tourist laughed and moved even closer. "Your moment with Allah? This is just ancient tradition. Relax. I just want a cool video." Without realizing the seriousness of his gesture, he reached out and grabbed the elder's shoulder with unnecessary force. The impact made the pilgrim lose his balance for a moment, leaning backward. A nearby group reacted immediately. "Hey, don't touch him like that," warned a man with a North African accent. "Show some respect," added another, visibly upset. The foreigner's expression shifted. His eyebrows rose for a few seconds, embarrassed, but he quickly regained his arrogant tone. "You guys are overreacting. It was just a tap. You take everything way too seriously." A young Indonesian man took a step forward and faced him. "Here, every movement matters. Don't disrespect someone who came to pray." Around them, small clusters of people began to form. The flow of tawaf rarely stopped, but the tourist's behavior was drawing enough attention to cause interruptions. The elder tried to avoid conflict, breathing deeply to steady the weakness brought on by the rough gesture. "I don't want trouble," he said, lowering his gaze. "Just let me continue." The American leaned toward him, bringing the phone closer to the old man's wrinkled face. "Why so sensitive? Look at the camera. It'll be interesting." The water bottle in a pilgrim's hand trembled. A woman under her hijab stepped back, shocked. A little boy holding his father's hand tightened his grip, sensing the tension growing heavier. On the right side of the courtyard, 2 guards watched. One crossed his arms, analyzing the situation carefully. The other placed his hand on his radio, waiting for the signal to intervene if necessary. The elder, already shaken, took half a step back. His voice nearly failed as he tried to maintain peace. "My son, don't expose me. I'm here to worship, not to appear in videos." Upon hearing this, the American's expression turned even more mocking. "Then why are you in the middle of thousands of people? This is public. Relax." A murmur spread through the crowd. People began to slow their tawaf steps, forming a semicircle around the growing tension. The air felt heavier, as if an invisible chain were pulling everyone's attention toward that unstable center. The guards took a few steps in the direction of the conflict. The tourist kept laughing, completely unaware of the spiritual weight of the place. The elder, on the other hand, tightened the cloth between his fingers, as if trying to grasp the strength that was slipping from his fragile hands. And before anyone could predict it, something subtle began to shift in the atmosphere, a sensation that made everyone hold their breath in the next instant. The group of worshippers resumed their steps when an almost imperceptible change swept through the courtyard. First came the silence, not total but a strange muffling, as if the sound of hundreds of footsteps had been swallowed by something unseen. The young Indonesian man looked around and frowned. Why did it suddenly get so quiet? A man beside him answered hesitantly, "I don't know, just it feels like the air got heavier." Without warning, the nearest flag began to shake. Moments earlier, no breeze had touched the place, and the heat remained steady over the heads covered with scarves. Still, the fabric swayed as if a narrow current of air were passing through only that spot. Some people stopped walking, others looked up, trying to understand the abrupt movement. A Moroccan woman leaning on her cane touched her daughter's arm and whispered, "Look at the top. The wind is coming from above, not the sides." The guards who had been watching the tourist shifted their attention for a moment, drawn to something in the sky. The more experienced one murmured, "This isn't normal. There's something moving up there." At the same time, cameras around the courtyard, from pilgrims' phones to the fixed ones on the upper corridors, began capturing small distortions of light. They weren't sun reflections, because the light pulsed briefly, like white points appearing and disappearing among the shadows cast by the structures. A teenager with his family moved closer to his father. "That's not a lens effect. I saw the same thing with my own eyes," he said, uneasy. The Egyptian elder, a few steps away from the conflict, was moving with difficulty. He could already feel the atmosphere changing in a strange way. He tightened the ihram cloth and placed a hand over his chest, trying to calm his breathing. The man who had defended him earlier looked at him with concern. "Uncle, are you feeling something?" "It's not pain," the pilgrim replied, breathless. "It's a warning." He then recited softly, barely moving his lips, "Ya Allah, protect those who came with sincere hearts." The phrase trembled on his tongue but carried deep meaning. Those nearby sensed the emotional weight of that moment. Suddenly, a child pointed upward. "Look! The light moved again!" A small group followed the gesture. At the highest point of the courtyard, an unusual reflection seemed to form a gentle arc, a brief flare that curved in the air and vanished before anyone could comment. A young man holding his phone approached the guards. "I recorded that. It wasn't a reflection from the Kaaba, it was up there." The uniformed men examined the screen quickly. The footage showed a faint, almost imperceptible flash, but with a circular pattern that didn't match any common phenomenon. "Keep recording," the guard instructed. "Something is changing here." The American tourist, still provoking every now and then, noticed that people around him were more focused on the sky than on him. He stepped back slightly, confused that he was no longer the center of attention. "What are you all looking at?" he asked impatiently. No one answered. The crowd was too absorbed by the sensation overtaking the environment, a mix of reverence, unease, and expectation. It felt as if the entire courtyard were on the brink of witnessing something beyond human understanding. The elder, now steadier, slowly lifted his eyes. The Kaaba before him remained still, firm, majestic, but the air around it vibrated, as if it were breathing. "Allah is showing a sign," a Syrian pilgrim murmured, moved. The flag trembled again, this time accompanied by a faint hum, almost inaudible. The clear sky took on a paler tone, as if a thin layer of light were spreading across the sacred space. And then, in a sudden movement, every gaze turned to the same point. Something was beginning to take shape, something no one could name, but everyone felt deep in their soul. The movement in the courtyard shifted into a different rhythm. The sense that something unusual was approaching made many people stop their tawaf for a few moments, trying to understand what was happening around them. Among them, a young Sudanese man held his phone tightly, eyes fixed on the screen where the recording of the American tourist was still open. "I got everything. From the moment he laughed," he murmured to the friend beside him. The companion motioned anxiously for the device. "Let me see it again. I want to confirm something." The video showed the exact moment when the foreigner stopped the elderly man and touched his shoulder with impatience. The audio captured the mocking tone, but there was another detail, a faint noise almost like a distant breath appearing exactly when the tourist's hand made contact with the Egyptian pilgrim. "Listen to this," the young man said, rewinding a few seconds. "That sound isn't from the environment, it sounds like wind." His friend frowned, but there was no wind at that moment. While the two spoke in low voices, a larger group began to gather. People who had witnessed the Americans' disrespectful laughter wanted to better understand why the atmosphere had changed so quickly. A little farther away, a young Turkish woman approached one of the guards. "Sir, my brother recorded a strange flash in the sky. Do you want to see it?" The guard nodded and took the phone carefully. The image showed a slightly curved point of light, appearing and disappearing in the clear sky. "That's not a reflection," the young woman said. "Look at the shape. It's too symmetrical." Another guard overheard and approached. "Does anyone else have recordings like this? We need to confirm if there's any light or sound interference in the courtyard." Immediately, several pilgrims raised their phones. Some had filmed the tourist, others had recorded parts of the surroundings, and still others had captured accidental clips while filming their own prayers. The variety of angles began to assemble an intriguing mosaic. A Pakistani man showed a video in which a flag trembled by itself, with no wind around it. "Look at the women's veils behind it. Nothing moves. Only the flag," he pointed out. Another pilgrim, from the Philippines, displayed footage in which the light seemed to pulse twice like a coded signal. The guards exchanged tense looks. "This is happening in different areas of the courtyard. It's not a glitch," one concluded. "We need to monitor this." Meanwhile, the American was beginning to realize he was no longer merely the center of attention. Now he was causing something close to widespread irritation. He lowered his phone, uncomfortable. "Why is everyone filming me?" he asked an Iraqi man. "Because you disrespected the eldest among us," the Iraqi replied firmly, "and something changed here after that." The tourist attempted to laugh, but his voice cracked. "Changed how?" No one answered. The crowd was too focused on analyzing the recordings, connecting details that just minutes earlier seemed insignificant. Near the Kaaba, the Egyptian elder walked slowly, feeling the air vibrate in an unfamiliar way. The muffled sound, the flickering light, the uneasy glances, it all seemed to point to something beyond the physical. A young Moroccan man approached him gently. "Uncle, do you feel something unusual?" The elder briefly held onto the young man's arm and closed his eyes for a few seconds. "Not unusual. Warning," he finally replied, as if an answer is about to come. The phrase left the group around him in silence. Some swallowed hard. Others looked back up at the sky, as if expecting another shift in the light. The Syrian pilgrim, who had sensed the heavy atmosphere earlier, approached the guards. "If you want, I can compile the videos to compare the exact seconds. There are strange patterns happening at the same time." The guard nodded. "Do it. We need to understand if anything natural is causing these effects." As videos were shared, replayed, and analyzed, two pilgrims who had arrived recently exchanged glances. "Did you notice everything started after he touched the old man?" "Yes, and after the elder whispered those words." Attention shifted back to the old man, who now moved his lips calmly, reciting a short supplication almost inaudible to human ears. "Ya Rab, guard this place from those who act with arrogance." The phrase came out soft, but reached the nearest hearts like a distant, deep echo. The pilgrims around him felt a collective shiver, and even the guard collecting the videos paused for a moment. The tourist, watching from afar, felt his stomach tighten. For the first time, his expression was not mocking. It was uncertain. A murmur spread through the crowd like an electric current. If what we saw really was a sign, something greater is going to happen. And in that moment, nothing felt truer. The recordings gathered by the pilgrims began circulating among small groups, forming clusters of discussion across the courtyard. With each new video shown, the unease deepened. The atmosphere of traditional reverence around the Kaaba now coexisted with a growing tension, not violent, but charged with moral weight. The young Sudanese man who had recorded the first video approached a group of Indonesians. "You need to see this too. His behavior didn't start today." One of them raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean it didn't start today?" The young man opened a folder on his phone. There were 3 more recordings from the day before. In one of them, the tourist was in the same area, filming 2 elders making supplications while leaning on each other. The video showed the American mocking the way the old men bent their bodies. "Look at this zoom," the Sudanese man said, enlarging the frame where the American made faces imitating the slow movements of the pilgrims. A Moroccan beside him murmured, "That's open disrespect. He came here to provoke." More people joined in. A young Malaysian woman, visibly shaken, showed another clip. "My brother filmed this last night. He made fun of the way women walked when they were trying to adjust their hijab." The group watched silently as the American, laughing, said, "They can't even walk properly with that." Reactions intensified, outraged voices mixed with expressions of concern. A Lebanese pilgrim commented, "This type of behavior doesn't go unnoticed here. Allah sees everything." A guard, noticing the growing collection of recordings, asked to examine them more thoroughly. "We'll check if there's a pattern," he said, gathering the phones. The tourist began to notice increasingly disapproving looks turning toward him. He walked in circles, restless. Why are you all staring at me like that? I didn't do anything wrong, he insisted, trying to approach a group to justify himself. No one responded. The silence around him was heavier than any spoken words. Meanwhile, a Pakistani pilgrim showed a curious video, footage of the moment the American touched the Egyptian elder's shoulder. The zoom revealed something even stranger. "Pay attention right here, exactly at this second," he said. At the precise moment of the rough touch, the camera captured two simultaneous things. The distant flag began trembling, even though the clothing of the people around it did not move at all. A faint halo appeared for less than half a second in the corner of the frame, as if something reflected in the air, but there was no surface that could have produced that glow. "This can't be a coincidence," whispered one of the men. The touch angered, and the environment reacted at the same instant. The guards, upon seeing this, exchanged serious looks. "This isn't normal. We need to report it." A pilgrim from Oman, who had been watching everything closely, stepped forward and said, "I was here yesterday." He shoved an elderly man who was walking slowly. Some saw it but ignored it, thinking he was just in a hurry. Now it looks like part of something bigger. The revelation fell heavily on everyone present. The image of a visitor who had merely caused trouble that day began to collapse. Now emerged the portrait of someone who had shown disrespect from the moment he arrived at the sacred place. The tourist, realizing that his behavior was being pieced together, tried to defend himself. "You're overreacting. You can't judge me based on clipped videos." One of the guards approached him, firm but respectful. "Sir, we ask that you wait here. We need to discuss what has occurred over the last 2 days." The American raised his hands, trying to appear calm. "All this because I touched that old man. You're making a big deal out of—" Before he could finish, another abrupt silence spread across the courtyard. A young Syrian looked around and murmured, "Did you feel that?" Something shifted again. People nearby began lifting their eyes. The light over the area seemed more intense, but without increasing in brightness, as if the glow came from within the space itself, not from the sun. The sense that more revelations were coming settled deeply into every heart. Tension reached a new level when the elder, leaning against one of the corridors, slowly raised his hand. The murmuring stopped. He took a deep breath and recited, in a fragile yet steady voice, "Allah does not leave injustice without an answer." The moment the words echoed, the tourist shuddered, touching his arm as if something had run through him. The witnesses said nothing. They didn't need to. The coincidence was far too impossible to ignore, and everyone knew the climax had not yet arrived. The guards kept the tourist in place, without aggression, simply preventing him from leaving while collecting statements. Around them, small clusters of pilgrims whispered among themselves, some outraged, others unsettled by the unusual sequence of events. The moral pressure grew by the minute, and inevitably everyone kept glancing at the Egyptian elder, as if waiting for him to utter the words that would determine what happened next. A young man from Morocco approached and said firmly, "Uncle, let them remove him. He disrespected you and many others." Another from Indonesia agreed, "This shouldn't be left unaddressed. This is a place of reverence. He came to mock." The guards exchanged looks. The rules did allow for the removal of anyone causing disorder in the sacred courtyard, and given the evidence, that option was becoming increasingly necessary. One of the officers took a step toward the tourist, preparing to ask for his documents and escort him out. The American, now without the arrogant tone, tried to explain himself. "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to offend anyone. You're blowing this out of proportion." But his shaky voice contrasted with the clarity of the recordings circulating around him. The crowd, though restrained, clearly showed their discomfort. People from different countries repeated tense phrases, still contained out of respect for the place. "He went too far. He shouldn't have touched the elder. May Allah bring justice." Amid that sea of opinions, the elder remained seated, breathing calmly. The white ihram cloth draped over his shoulder, and his hands, resting on his knees, trembled slightly. A Syrian boy approached timidly. "Uncle, what do you want to happen?" The question fell into the air like an anchor. The courtyard, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath even more. The guards stopped. The pilgrims fell silent. Even the American stood frozen, as if waiting for a verdict that could change everything. The elder slowly lifted his face, revealing tired yet peaceful eyes. He placed a hand on his chest and murmured something only a few managed to hear. A man beside him leaned closer. "What did you say, uncle?" The elder closed his eyes and then spoke, now audibly, softly but clearly. "Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil." Allah is sufficient for us, and He is the best protector. The words moved across the space like an invisible thread, Some people felt tears slide down their faces without knowing why. Others lowered their heads immediately, as if they had just heard a sacred sentence. The guards froze for a few seconds, waiting for him to continue. He didn't. Only that verse, repeated with the serenity of someone placing every decision in the hands of the Creator. The tourist took a deep breath, uncertain. So, he wants me to be removed? The elder opened his eyes and looked at him for a moment. There was no anger in his gaze, only a profound sadness, the kind felt by someone who has witnessed something that should never have happened in that place. My son, each person answers for what they carry in their heart, the elder said in a low voice. I do not wish harm upon you. I wish for you to learn. The words stunned the crowd. Many had expected anger, reproach, perhaps indignation, but the elder offered only surrender and patience. A Pakistani pilgrim said, moved, he chose Sabus, that is greatness. Another murmured, if he was wronged and still didn't ask for punishment, that says everything. The guards hesitated again. If the one wronged wasn't requesting removal, what should they do? Some leaned toward the elder, seeking further guidance, as if the spiritual decision mattered more than any official protocol. Uncle, do you want us to continue with the removal? One of them asked respectfully. The elder shook his head. I am not the one who decides. This place belongs to Allah. Let him show what he wishes. The phrase sent chills through the crowd. It was impossible not to notice how the atmosphere around them seemed to react to every word spoken by that man. Even the air, moments later, shifted slightly, as if the environment itself awaited the next part of the story. The tourist stepped back, uneasy. He seemed to feel something he couldn't explain. What are you all looking at? Why does it feel like something's about to happen? No one answered. The silence of the sacred courtyard grew even denser. There was a clear sense that the elder's request, or rather his refusal to request punishment, had just opened the way for a greater response to approach. And every person there, of different languages, cultures, and ages, stood still, waiting to see what form that response would take. The murmur that had been moving through the courtyard vanished as if ripped out of the air. A thick silence overtook the sacred space, so deep that even the footsteps of the pilgrims stopped producing sound. A guard looked toward the sky, trying to identify what was causing that strange suspension, but there were no clouds, no shadows, no visible movement of any kind. Then a short vibration traveled through the ground, not a tremor but a gentle pulse, almost like a heartbeat beneath the marble. Some people looked down at their feet, startled. Others held their children's hands. The American tourist, still inside the involuntary circle formed around him, stepped back. What's happening? He murmured, his voice breaking. Before anyone could answer, the air changed texture. A cold current crossed the courtyard, not coming from one side or the other, but rising from the center and spreading outward like a living breath. The women's scarves rippled all at once, perfectly synchronized. The men adjusted their ihram, surprised by the sudden drop in temperature. A nearby flag shot upward with force, as if pulled by invisible hands. A moment later, another flag did the same. The fabric didn't just sway, it spun, tracing arcs impossible for any natural wind. The circle of pilgrims widened around the Kaaba. The current of air, now stronger, began forming a perfect circular motion, moving around the courtyard as if obeying an unseen command. Fine dust lifted and shaped itself into a pale ring that rotated slowly, rising higher with each passing second. Subhanallah, murmured a man from Eastern Europe, eyes filled with tears. A Pakistani woman fell to her knees, overwhelmed. This is a sign. This is a sign, she repeated between sobs. The American tried to back away, but the wind seemed to push him toward the center again. He raised his arm to shield his face from the dust spiraling around him, forming small whirlwinds that struck his feet like soft waves. "Somebody help me!" he shouted, but his voice vanished into the movement of the air. The Egyptian elder, still seated near the corridor, watched with an expression of profound serenity. His gaze remained fixed on the Kaaba, not on the tourist, as if he recognized in that moment an answer that required no explanation. The wind intensified. It wasn't violent, it was precise. The circle of air tightened, closing in around the American. He stumbled once, then again, struggling against the gentle yet constant pressure. His knees hit the ground with controlled force, as if something guided him there without harming him. The phones recording the event captured the moment the dust rose around him, creating a soft spiral that enveloped him completely, and in the exact second he fell fully to his knees, the wind stopped. It didn't fade, it stopped. Instantly, as if an enormous invisible hand had sealed the space. The silence that followed was absolute. No bird calls, no footsteps, no voices, only the collective breathing of thousands who stared, stunned, at the foreigner kneeling motionless before the Kaaba. A tear slid down the cheek of a young man from Turkey. Allah shows his strength without harming, only correcting, he said, moved. Some women began crying openly. Men pressed their hands to their chests. Children stepped closer to their parents in silence, as if instinctively understanding the gravity of the moment. The tourist remained on his knees, eyes wide, unable to process what had just happened. His phone lay on the ground, vibrating with the still active recording. A pilgrim gently nudged it away with his foot to prevent it from breaking, but no one touched the man. It was a moment that did not belong to human hands. There was an involuntary reverence in the air, a collective understanding that something transcendent had touched the space. And in the midst of that suspended scene, everyone knew the story would not end there. The silence was not an ending. It was a sign of what was coming. The stillness that had overtaken the courtyard dissolved slowly. The American remained kneeling for a few seconds, trying to catch his breath until his hands began trembling visibly. He reached for the phone on the marble, but his fingers faltered, and the device slipped again, sliding a few inches. I don't understand," he whispered, his voice hoarse. A group of pilgrims kept their distance, not out of hostility, but out of respect for the fragile moment. Some were still wiping tears, others watched in silence, unable to explain what they had witnessed. The guards approached carefully, ensuring no one crossed the space around the Egyptian elder, who remained the moral center of the moment. The tourist lifted his gaze and met the elder's eyes. A shock crossed his face. Shame, regret, and fear tangled together. He tried to stand, stumbled, and caught himself with his hands. Then he walked a few unsteady steps until he stopped before the man he had humiliated. "Sir, I'm sorry," he said in English, unable to hide his tears. "I was arrogant. I shouldn't have touched you. I shouldn't have laughed at anyone." The elder raised his head slowly, showing more compassion than surprise. One of the guards gently moved aside anyone who got too close, preserving the circle around them. Pilgrims from different countries watched, moved, understanding that something rare was unfolding, a sincere apology born from the silent impact they had all felt. "My son," the elder replied weakly, "learn from what you saw today. Arrogance wounds the heart of the one who carries it first." The American covered his face, sobbing. "I want to change. Please forgive me." The elder nodded softly. There was no scolding, no reproach, only mercy. The guards opened space for him to return to the tawaf. The believers, now deeply touched, followed the movement with reverence. Some murmured prayers for both men, others simply smiled gently, relieved. The atmosphere around them grew lighter, almost sacred, as if that reconciliation were the ending everyone had unconsciously awaited. With the apology resolved, the crowd opened space for the elder to continue his tawaf. Two young men, one from Turkey and another from Somalia, walked beside him, offering support without disrupting his pace. A Saudi woman approached with a bottle of cool water and said tenderly, "Uncle, please take this. The heat is strong." He thanked her with a humble gesture. Without interrupting the quiet supplications, he whispered with each slow step. The elder's presence began to guide the movement around him. Pilgrims who had previously only watched now walked behind him, almost like a procession. The environment gained a renewed serenity, as if a cloak of respect had settled over the courtyard. Even the sound of footsteps grew softer. A guard adjusted the circulation lane to ensure the elder had enough space, and many volunteers did the same, opening the way gently. Soon it became clear that he no longer walked alone. Each circuit was accompanied by emotional glances, gestures of help, and reverent silence. Some murmured, "Allah honored the patient." Others, still moved by what they had witnessed, added, "Today we learned more than what we came seeking." And the Kaaba, still and majestic at the center of everything, seemed to embrace that transformation as a silent witness to the new heart that had emerged there. When the movement of the courtyard returned to its natural rhythm, the atmosphere felt lighter than before. The wind that had startled everyone no longer moved through the space, but its memory lingered like the silent mark of a warning understood. The Kaaba, still and radiant under the golden light of sunset, reflected the peace now surrounding every pilgrim who had witnessed what happened. Among the small groups, the conversation was always the same. Humility saves, while pride only exposes the fragility of the one who carries it. Many remarked that no gesture is ever wasted before the Most High, neither a whispered supplication nor an ignored act of disrespect. Every action receives its answer at the exact time, and the circle of wind that crossed the courtyard had become living proof of that truth. The elder, seated in a shaded corner, watched the continuous flow of worshippers. There was no triumph in his expression, only gratitude. He understood that the purpose of the event was not to humiliate anyone, but to awaken hearts that had grown numb. And there, before the sacred house, each person walked away carrying a lesson they would not forget. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel and watch the next video, where we continue sharing messages that strengthen faith, calm the soul, and reveal signs that often go unnoticed in our daily lives.